Okay, I'll go ahead and get started this morning by just officially welcoming all of you guys. Sawadee Kap. Welcome to Wat Tung Yu. Nice to see all of you guys this morning. Those of you guys here at the temple and those of you guys joining us online, welcome to everyone. Today is what we call our group learning program, where each Sunday I get together with students, guide you guys in a meditation to get started, and then we move into teachings to help you guys understand the path to enlightenment that the Buddha taught during his lifetime. This path to enlightenment is to move your mind to a point where it's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, no longer experiencing any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy. Even the slightest displeasure is eliminated from the enlightened mind. You'll notice that there's focus, concentration, clarity, deep memory, that your personal and professional relationships will really blossom and improve. You'll notice that you're not even in a bad mood anymore by the time you get to enlightenment. And that comes through training the mind, not through believing anything. The teachings of the Buddha, they're not rules or commandments. It's not about a bunch of beliefs and then hoping something good happens when you die. You're learning teachings now in this life. You're examining them and investigating them. Then you're reflecting on those teachings to independently verify whether they're true. And then you're practicing the teachings to train the mind and uproot certain pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind. And one of the primary things that we do is meditation, but there's other things that you need as well. You wouldn't be able to just meditate your way to enlightenment, and you wouldn't be able to believe your way to enlightenment, but you also wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment without meditation either. So I'm going to start you guys off with some meditation so you can learn a bit about meditation, and then we'll transition into understanding some teachings that we have today based on this first book of the book series that we use for this group learning program. There's a 13-book series, and the very first book is what we use for this program, where each Sunday we meet over a 7-month period, and I share teachings from each individual chapter in the book. And students can either download the books, they can take them and go print them, they can get them here at the temple, or they can get them on Amazon. They're essentially available for free at no cost. The printed versions, you just reimburse us for the cost of printing, but otherwise you can get them for free. And then you can learn over a 7-month period, establishing a nice foundation to train your mind and move closer to this enlightened mental state. So I'll start with meditation to help you guys understand a bit about that. And then, like I mentioned, we'll move into more teachings to help you guys. The meditation that I'll share with you guys is called breathing mindfulness meditation. This is a meditation that's going to help you cultivate the mind and train the mind. And what we do in order to ease into the meditation is we do chanting. Chanting is done in the Pali language. This is the language that the original teachings of the Buddha are captured in. And these chants, there's nothing mystical or magical about them. They aren't a rite, a ritual, or a ceremony or worship. It's not prayer, anything like that. The chanting is on a laminated sheet back there on the table that you're welcome to get if you like. You'll see the Pali chants that you're welcome to follow along with. And there's even the English translations as well, so you can see what's actually being chanted. If you see these English translations, what you'll notice is that there's a lot of respect and gratitude and admiration for the Buddha. I suspect that the Buddha didn't actually create these chants himself. It was probably his students, either during his life or after his death, that created these chants because they had a lot of admiration and respect and gratitude for him, because he discovered and figured out how to get to this enlightened mental state where the mind's peaceful and joyful for the rest of your life. He figured this out by himself, and then he spent from the age of 35 to 80 sharing the teachings for 45 years, helping people to discover and figure out how to get to the same mental state. And he did this without any expectation of anything in return. He didn't want anything from his students. He just chose to share the teachings that it took for him to get to that mental state with other people. And if somebody helped you go from anger, sadness, frustration, and all those other discontent feelings to the peace and joy, you'd probably have a lot of respect and gratitude for that person too. So I suspect his students created these either during his life or after his death. So when you hear me doing the chanting, you're welcome to follow along. But just understand that it's not mystical or magical. It's not a rite, a ritual, or a ceremony or worship, and it's not prayer or anything like that. It's just to help build some awareness of the mind, awareness of the breath, and ease the mind into meditation so you can get more benefit out of the meditation itself. Then once we're in the meditation, I will share some guidance with you guys. I'll be kind of talking a bit while we're actually meditating together to guide you in the meditation itself and understanding how to actually meditate. Then there'll be a period of time where I'll just be quiet and we'll all be meditating together. Those of you guys here and those of you guys online will just be meditating together. And then after we do that, then I'll come out of the meditation with some chanting. And you'll hear during the meditation of how to actually do it. Then after we come out of the meditation with chanting, we'll kind of open up to questions, and I'll move into teaching and sharing different things and helping you guys to understand more of the path to enlightenment. In terms of the position for your body to meditate in, there's 4 different positions that the Buddha taught. They're seated, lying, standing, and walking. These are all 4 positions that you might learn at different times. You'll need these for different reasons at different times. Typically, people will learn in the seated position, either sitting in a chair or sitting on the floor or some other way of sitting, because this is easily accessible to most people. If you're on the floor, you might have a cushion or maybe multiple cushions under your rear. This helps to get the hips up in the air and lessens the angle at the hips, the knees, and the ankles. Some people like to put their legs off the mat, which accomplishes the same thing, getting your hips up in the air so that you can have circulation flowing in your lower body. So you're not interested in having your legs real tight, because that will inhibit the circulation and your legs might go numb during the meditation. Your hands in the arms, the Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. If this is comfortable for you, you could use this, but it's not about everybody doing it exactly the same way, because everybody's body is a little bit different. Some people might decide to put their palms on their thighs or their knees or their palms up. Essentially, you'd like your lower body and your hands and arms to be comfortable. If you're in a chair, you might just have your feet flat on the floor or lightly cross at the ankles, and then again, just resting your hands and arms comfortably so that there's no muscles engaged in the lower body and the hands and arms. The upper body should be erect, with your sternum up and your shoulders back. This helps to open up the lungs and allows you to breathe. It also helps the mind to be attentive and alert during the meditation. Whereas if you were slouched, you probably find it's challenging to breathe, and your mind would be complacent or dull or lethargic. But also, if you are real rigid, the mind might be overactive or uptight. So you'd like to be in the middle, where the upper body is erect, to keep the mind attentive and alert during the meditation. So essentially, the body shouldn't be painful, but it shouldn't be luxurious either. It should be in the middle where it's comfortable. And sitting like this or any other way that you find that's comfortable for you, that's the best way for you. So it's not about everybody doing it exactly the same way. So I'll ease us into meditation with some chanting, and then I'll be back with some guidance at that point. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakeva Otang Mahakevanhang Apivateyami Savakhato Mahakevata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakevato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakeva Arahang Samma สัมมุตโตวิชาจารนังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสานามาสติสัตตาตาวามานุสนังโอโตภาควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then when you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. So you can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose, establishing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาพุทธังมหาเขวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามาสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาดัมมาสติสัตตาตาวาปานุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you'd like to slowly make your way out of meditation, I would like to once again welcome all of you guys. Those of you guys that are here at the temple that maybe joined us after we started meditating, welcome to you guys. And those of you guys online that are joining us as well, welcome to everyone. As I mentioned, this is called breathing mindfulness meditation. This is a primary form of training that an individual would need in order to move their mind to the enlightened mental state. And you build this practice up over time to 2 or 3 meditation sessions for 30 minutes or more. And this is something that students usually take time to build up to. It can take 6 months, a year, even 2 years to build up to this. But your goal here isn't to eliminate your thoughts. Sometimes people think that's the goal based on the guidance that I give during the meditation. But your goal isn't to eliminate your thoughts. As long as you're alive, you're going to have thoughts. The goal is to be aware of the mind. Develop mindfulness or awareness of mind, develop concentration, and be able to easily let go. Because in the unenlightened state, the mind's holding on and holding on and holding on. And if you get what you want, you get pleasant feelings. But if you don't get what you want, you get painful feelings. So those pleasant feelings are things like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. If you get what you want, you'll get those pleasant feelings, but they're only temporary because they're based on some condition. So if the sun is out, you might get happy because it's sunny. But then if it starts raining or some other weather condition, you might be sad or frustrated or agitated. So if you base your inner feelings of happiness on some condition, like your bank account or your job or what your boss says or does, what your parents do, what your friends or family or life partner or children do. You'll experience happiness when they do what you want. But when they don't do what you want, you'll experience the painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, and other discontent feelings. So if you can train your mind to have awareness of the mind, and you can be aware of these discontent feelings that are arising, and then you can cut them off and let them go, this will really help your mind. And it's part of the core central teachings of the Buddha. So just like an athlete exercises their mind, exercises their body daily in order to perform their sport, we exercise our mind in order to train the mind and control the mind and discipline the mind. Because when your mind's angry or sad or frustrated, you don't have control of the mind. The mind's like a wild animal. So in meditation, you're training the mind so that you build the wholesome qualities of mindfulness or awareness of mind and concentration, and getting rid of the unwholesome quality of what we call craving, desire, attachment, where the mind is longing, yearning, chasing after things and holding on to it. And now you can use these qualities in daily life, that wherever you see your mind about to become frustrated or angry or agitated, you can cut that off and let it go, if you've been training your mind regularly and consistently with this meditation over a period of time. So this is something that I teach more thoroughly when students are taking various courses and retreats with me, so that they can really develop their practice. But this just gives you a little bit of a taste of this meditation and what it's like. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move into some teaching on chapter 19 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This is the book that we use for this group learning program. This particular topic is titled Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you're going to learn about the life story of Gotama Buddha and why he actually was motivated to get to this enlightened mental state. And then we're going to talk about sickness, aging, and death, which are three primary things that are very difficult for one to experience in the unenlightened state, that oftentimes an individual struggles with their own sickness, their own aging, their own death, or the people around you. If your parents or people that are close to you, like friends or family, are experiencing sickness, aging, or death, you might struggle in that situation with certain painful feelings. So I'm going to teach you guys about the life story of the Buddha, and then we're going to talk specifically about these three times in your life that you might struggle with and have challenges with, so that you can overcome those struggles and you no longer will struggle with those things. As we go in the way that I talk, in the way that I share teachings, I will pause in order to allow you guys to ask questions. And as you would like to ask questions, here at the temple, we have microphones in the white bowl there at the camera. If you could use those microphones, it will help the people online to be able to hear you, and then we'll be able to hear you here at the temple as well. We have plenty of microphones, so if you take one, you can just keep it with you and then pass it around to the people close to you that might need it. And the way that these microphones work is there's a little gray button on the front. You just press that button. You just wait about a second or so and then hold it up towards your chin, and then we'll be able to hear you really easily. So as we go, feel free to ask any and all questions that you like. You'll see me pausing at different times. As I'm talking about the life story of the Buddha, I tend to talk about it all the way through and then open up the questions. But typically when I'm teaching various topics, I will be pausing about every 15 or 20 minutes to open up for questions. But with this topic, it's usually best to just explain this whole life story and then talk about sickness, aging, and death afterwards. So the life story of Gotama Buddha is like this. It's based in the Pali Canon, which in the Pali Canon is the original source teachings of the Buddha. His teachings during his lifetime were oral, but nowadays we have books that document his teachings. There's 45 books that are about this thick. That's about 5 inches or 10 centimeters thick. And if you read the Pali Canon, you'll be able to see his life story. And what I'm going to share with you is a summarized version of that. And I'm going to organize this talk in talking about his birth, his early life, his journey to enlightenment, and then his teaching career and what he did during his teaching career. So to talk a bit about his birth, he was born into a royal family, and he was given the name Siddhartha Gotama. This was his name. And he was born to a queen. His father was the king. And as his mom and his dad were together, being the king and the queen, as it was time for the mom to give birth, what was customary during this time is for the mom to go back to her homeland. So there was a caravan that was organized to be able to take her back to where her parents were so that she could give birth there. And on this journey back to her home, she goes into labor pains, and she ends up asking the caravan to stop. They get out, and she goes over to this tree, and she's holding on to this tree, standing up, trying to deliver the baby while standing up. The baby wouldn't come out through the normal birthing canal, so the baby ends up breaking through the side of her stomach, and she ends up dying 7 days later. This was 2,500 years ago. So nowadays, we would have just did a C-section, and she would have been just fine because we have medical technology in a situation where a baby has difficulty coming out through the birthing canal. But during this time frame, it wasn't uncommon for the mom and or the baby to die during childbirth because the medical technology wasn't what we have today. So the baby breaks through the side of the stomach, and she ends up dying 7 days later. And there was actually protocols in place during this time because of childbirth oftentimes leading to the death of the mother potentially. They actually had protocols that your siblings would then adopt your children to be their own. So she had an older sister, and this older sister adopted Siddhartha Gotama to be her own child. So essentially his stepmother was his aunt, and she raises him to be her own child. It's said during his birth that as soon as he came out of the stomach, he walked 7 steps. Lotus flowers were blossoming under his feet, and he spoke and said, "This will be my last life." I don't suspect that this part of the story is actually true, because the next part of the story that I'm going to tell you wouldn't actually be needed if this part of the story was true. Oftentimes when teachings and stories are being handed down from generation to generation, when there's someone like Siddhartha Gotama who did amazing things in his life, sometimes people embellish their story in order to make them look even better than they already are. The Buddha did amazing things during his life, and we don't need to embellish his life story, but I suspect that they actually embellished his life story over the generations, because if your child had lotus flowers blossoming under their feet and they were able to speak and they were able to walk as soon as they come out, you wouldn't need this next part of the story. So the next thing that occurs is his father, the king, summons advisors to come tell him what his son is going to become in life, because it was common practice to kind of bring fortune tellers to the king and tell the king, what your son was going to become. Well, if your son has lotus flowers blossoming under their feet and they're able to walk and talk right away, you probably don't need to know what this person's going to become. They're going to have something pretty miraculous going on in their life. So these advisors that came to his father is what is documented as well. And it says that there's 108 advisors that come and advise his father of what his son is going to become. So 107 of these advisors come to his dad, and they tell the king, your son's going to be a great leader. He's going to be a great monarch. He's going to rule over your land. He's going to expand your territory. He's going to be a very well-developed king, essentially, a very great leader. And of course, his father's like, yeah, that's my boy. That's what his dad would like to hear. But then there's this one advisor, the 108th advisor, who comes in and apologizes to the king and says, sir, I'm so sorry to deliver this news to you. I heard the other advisors, and they're 100% correct that your son is going to be a great leader, but not the type of leader that you think he's going to be. He's going to be a great spiritual leader. He's not going to be a monarch and a ruler over your kingdom. And his father didn't like this. So just in case this advisor was accurate and correct, he decides to sequester his son into the palace, essentially keeping him locked away in the palace, never allowing him to go outside to explore the kingdom, because he wasn't interested in his son understanding worldly affairs and what went on in the kingdom, because then he might be interested to be a spiritual leader. He was kind of wooing him into the ways of being a monarch by giving him lots of riches and royal fabrics and food and clothing, beautiful women bathing him, entertainment, and different people taking care of him. He thought if he could kind of get him fixated in this life of being a monarch and having all these royal riches, that he would never be interested in giving that up to go be a spiritual leader. So he ends up keeping him in the palace for his entire life. When he gets to the age of 29, Siddhartha Gotama, not being a Buddha yet, he's still unenlightened, and not even knowing that he's going to be a Buddha at this point. At the age of 29, he realizes that he's going to now become the king, because during this time frame, you would become the king when you turned 30 years old, and your father would retire and then be there to help you and guide you to becoming a better and better king. So at the age of 29, Siddhartha Gautama realizes he's about to become the king, and he's never even been outside in the kingdom to be able to rule over these people and help this population of people. So he goes out of the palace without his father being aware, and he takes with him his royal attendant, which is kind of like a chief of staff, kind of your confidant, someone who's going to help you to administer whatever it is you need to do as a prince and as a king. So he takes with him his royal attendant, and he goes out into the kingdom, and he has what's called the 4 observations. He observes a sickly person, he observes an aging person, he observes a dead corpse, and he observes a ascetic, or someone who's given up worldly possessions in order to go on this journey to better understand life and ultimately get to enlightenment. So when he sees these 4 observations, he doesn't understand what's going on because he never experienced this when he was in the palace. So he sees the sickly person, and he sees this disgruntledness around this sickly person, and the people around them were also disgruntled, their family. And he turns to his royal attendant and he asks, like, what's going on over there? Why are those people so upset and agitated and frustrated? And his royal attendant is like, oh, that person's sick and they can't work and they can't get the same amount of food and the resources that they need in order to sustain their life. So they're very upset. And Siddhartha Gautama didn't understand this because he was in the palace living this life where everything was provided for him. So then he sees this aging person, kind of someone who's kind of getting older and decrepit. Their bones are protruding, having difficulty walking. And once again, he sees this frustration and agitation and annoyance and irritation. And he has to ask his royal attendant, what's going on there? And he's like, oh, those people are upset because that person's getting old and, they can't work. They can't do the things that they need to do, and they're not going to necessarily have the resources they need in order to sustain their life. And this has a real impact on him because, again, he's not living that kind of life. Everything's provided for him. And then he sees a dead corpse and people grieving around the dead corpse. And he asks his royal attendant, what's going on over there? Why are these people experiencing that? And the royal attendant has to explain to him, oh, this is what happens to us at the end of this life is we all die. And then the family is upset and maybe frustrated and sad based on this person having died. And Siddhartha Gautama didn't even understand that as part of his life. At the age of 29, he was so, sequestered and sheltered into this royal palace. But then he sees this 4th observation, which is a roaming ascetic, what we might refer to as a monk, someone who's given up worldly possessions and gone into this lifestyle of trying to understand their mind and understand life. And he has to ask his royal attendant, what's that? And he's like, oh, that's a person who's on this journey to getting to enlightenment and trying to understand this sickness, aging, and death. And Siddhartha Gautama realizes in this moment that the kingdom is full of this misery and despair that is vastly different than the life that he experienced in the royal palace, and that he's not interested in ruling over this misery and despair. And he decides he's going to be a person who goes off and tries to understand why this sickness, aging, and death is occurring and how to help people escape from the misery and despair that they experience as a result of these things. So he goes back to the royal palace, and at this time he has a wife and he has a young child, an infant, and they're sleeping. And he decides he's going to leave the palace, and he kind of looks in on them as they're sleeping, and he just leaves from the royal palace. He didn't understand his mind 100% at this point because he's not enlightened, but he understood enough that he felt like if he woke up his wife and he woke up his child, that he wouldn't be able to leave, that it would be too difficult for him to leave. So he just kind of leaves in the middle of the night, and he takes with him his horse, his favorite horse, and his royal attendant, and he leaves out of the palace. And as he leaves the palace, he ultimately gets to a point where he tells his royal attendant that he can go, that he's been a great attendant to him, he's been very helpful, and he lets his horse go, and he decides to go off on his own. And he ends up cutting off his hair. At this time, what the royal family would do is they would grow their hair very long. Even the males, they would grow this very long flowing hair. And this is the way that people knew that you were part of the royal family. So if you went out into the kingdom and you had this long, beautiful flowing hair, they would know that you're part of the royal family. Because the commoners, those of us that were working in the fields or working in businesses and doing laborious work, we wouldn't be able to have this long flowing hair because we wouldn't have the time to detangle it, to clean it, shampoo it, comb it. It would only be people who are in the royal family that would have servants and people to be able to do this for them. So if you went out into the kingdom and you had long, beautiful flowing hair, they knew that you were part of the royal family. Nowadays, we just take pictures and we put the picture of the king or the queen all over the kingdom, and everybody knows who that is. But they didn't have that technology during that time, so they would use this long flowing hair to help people know who the royal family was. So by him cutting off his hair, it's essentially saying, I'm never going back. Because people would never believe that he was the king if he didn't have this long, beautiful hair that he had been growing for 29 years. It also helps you to do other things by cutting off your hair, which you don't have to cut off your hair in order to get to enlightenment. But one of the things that it does is it helps you to disassociate with this body as being who you are as a person and trying to project a certain image in the world and be perceived a certain way in the world, which is a teaching that students learn with me when they're learning from the very beginning of the teachings of the Buddha. It's called realizing non-self, or understanding the universal truth of non-self. So cutting off his hair is like, I'm never going back to be a member of the royal family ever again. So he goes off into this life of homelessness, where he starts studying with two different teachers. The first one he studies with for about a year. And this teacher was claiming that they knew how to get to enlightenment and train their mind. So Siddhartha Gotama is studying with this person to understand his teachings. And this person was teaching him to hang himself upside down from trees, to lay on beds of nails, to pierce his body with metal implements, to starve himself. The thought was that if you could cause this physical pain to the body and you could overcome that with the mind, that you would experience enlightenment. And after 1 year, this teacher determined that Siddhartha Gotama had mastered his teachings and advised him that he should start teaching his teachings because he had mastered these teachings within 1 year. And Siddhartha Gotama realized that his mind wasn't any more peaceful and joyful than it was before he started training with this individual. So he leaves this teacher and he goes and learns with another teacher who claims that it's his teachings that led to enlightenment. And this particular teacher was essentially teaching him the same things, hanging himself upside down from trees, piercing his body with metal implements, laying on beds of nails, starving himself. And he realizes after 1 year that Siddhartha Gautama has mastered his teachings. So he says, hey, you're a master of my teachings. You can now share my teachings. And Siddhartha Gautama realizes that his mind isn't any more peaceful than it was when he was in the palace, that these teachings hadn't led to enlightenment. So after 2 years of trying to get to enlightenment with these teachers, he gets frustrated and agitated because he's not enlightened yet. So he's still going to experience those discontent feelings. And he decides to go off on his own into the forest. And when he goes off into the forest, he only knows what these teachers have been teaching him. So he continues to do those things. He continues to starve himself and do all these other things that he was doing. He takes it so far that he was only eating 1 grain of rice per day. And he was thinking that that's what he needed to do in order to get to enlightenment. But he gets to the point where his body is so malnourished that his bones are protruding, his facial bones, his ribs are protruding, his stomach is sunken in. He's essentially on death's doorstep. He's about to die. And there was this mother and this young child, this daughter, who come by and they see that he's about to die because he's so malnourished. And they had a bowl of rice and they begged him and pleaded with him to eat this bowl of rice. And he reluctantly starts eating this bowl of rice. And he realizes in this moment that when he was in the palace, he was living with all these sensual pleasures, all these material possessions, an enormous wealth of pleasures and sensual desires. But then when he left the palace, he went all the way to the other side where he was disparaging the body and causing all this physical pain and starving himself. And he realizes that these two sides of the spectrum isn't what's actually going to lead to enlightenment. It's when you bring the mind to the middle that you can get to enlightenment, where you fine-tune the mind and come to the middle. He ultimately shares a teaching when he starts teaching about this instrument, where he says, a musical instrument that has the string real tight and you pluck it, it doesn't play beautiful music. It doesn't play the way that it was intended to play. But if the musical instrument has a very loose string and you pluck it, it doesn't play beautiful music there either. And he talks about how the mind functions in the same way, that if it's too tight or if it's too loose, it doesn't function the way that it was intended to function. It's only when you tune it perfectly in the middle that it performs optimally. So he starts developing what's called the middle way. This middle way, he starts applying to every aspect of his life. And eating is one of those things. He ends up eating just one meal a day. So he starts eating in moderation. So over the next 4 years, while he's alone, he ends up getting to enlightenment. And he knows that he's gotten to enlightenment through training his mind because his mind's peaceful, calm, serene, content with joy. He no longer experiences any of those discontent feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, stress, anxiety. Even the slightest displeasure is eliminated from the enlightened mind. You experience focus, concentration, clarity, deep memory. You'll notice your personal, professional relationships improve, drastically improve. You don't have bitterness and hostility in your personal and professional relationships. And you're not even in a bad mood anymore, essentially, right? You're just always in a good mood by the time you get to enlightenment because you eliminate certain pollutions in the mind that are causing it to be shaken up. So he knows that he's gotten to enlightenment, but he knows that his teachings are very different than anything that was being taught in that area. In that area, there was various teachers who were claiming that it was their teachings that led to enlightenment. And people were believing those things, and they were hanging themselves upside down from trees, laying on beds of nails. They were starving themselves, doing all these things. But his teachings were very different. So he ends up going to this tree and he hangs out there for about 7 weeks. And ultimately what he's doing is he's contemplating whether or not he should share his teachings with others, or should he just go back to the royal family and kind of hang out there. Well, over 7 weeks, he ultimately comes to the decision that he's going to share his teachings. And his teachings being vastly different, he knows that it's going to be very challenging for him to share these teachings. Sometimes people attribute this tree to the location of where he was actually attaining enlightenment, but in reality, he attained enlightenment over a 6-year period. It was this tree where he contemplated whether or not he should share his teachings or not. So he didn't sit under a tree and meditate and instantly get to enlightenment like some people think. It's that he sat at this tree for 7 weeks contemplating whether or not he should share his teachings or not. And then he ends up deciding, okay, I'm going to share these teachings. And he goes back to the area where he was originally learning with those 2 teachers. And he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his previous teachers. And when he sees these individuals, they start mocking him. They start joking him. They start laughing at him. And the reason why is because they see that he has meat on his bones. And to them, he's not on the path to enlightenment. To them, you have to starve yourself to get to enlightenment. So they thought he had given up. So they start mocking him and joking him. But by this point, when you're enlightened, you're not affected by that. If someone starts mocking you and joking you and ridiculing you, your mind's not shaken up by that. Your mind's peaceful and joyful. It's unshakable. So he comes over to where they're at. They're mocking him and joking him. He sits down and he takes his hand and he touches the earth. You might see statues that depict this where he's sitting and he's touching the earth with his hand. And what he's doing is he's performing the first and only miracle that he ever performs. When he touches the earth, he calls these animals to come to where he's at. Essentially deer, squirrels, rabbits, birds, lizards, snakes, all these animals just come to where he's at by him touching the earth. And these 5 people see what he's done, and then they sit down and they start listening to him. And he delivers his very first teaching, which is what I share with students from the very beginning, because this is what you need to learn in order to be able to get on the path to enlightenment, which is the 4 Noble Truths. He shares in the 4 Noble Truths 4 simple statements that if you learn these, you reflect on them to independently verify them, and you practice them, you can understand why your mind is experiencing all these discontent feelings. And in these 4 statements, these individuals hearing the Buddha talk and teach these 4 noble truths, they could independently verify that he had discovered why their mind experiences discontentedness and how to eliminate it. So they knew that he actually was enlightened because he understood why your mind experiences anger and sadness and frustration and all these other discontent feelings. In the unenlightened state, we tend to think that it's other people who are causing you to be angry. You might blame other people for causing you to be angry or sad or frustrated or irritated. But when you learn the Four Noble Truths, you can have this breakthrough to understanding what's truly causing your discontent feelings. Because if you misunderstand and you have the misperception or the confusion that other people are causing you to be angry, you'll never solve your problem. What you end up doing is falsely believing that something external is causing your discontent feelings, so you'll tend to push people away. You'll push them away thinking that that's going to solve the problem, or you'll push the situation away. But it doesn't solve the problem because you just get angry or irritated about something else. It's only a matter of time. If the true problem is that somebody else is causing your anger, when you push them away, it would solve your anger. You would never be angry anymore. Or the second thing that people will do when they misunderstand and they don't know the Four Noble Truths is they might be bitter and harsh and hostile towards somebody through their intentions, their speech, and their actions, because they're misunderstanding those painful feelings that they're having and they're attributing it to somebody else. So they'll be bitter and harsh and hostile to that individual. Or the third thing that you might do when you misunderstand the problem is you might put your expectations on people and you might try to control people to do things your way. And this is just because of a lack of wisdom of what's truly causing your painful feelings, those discontent feelings that you experience. So you'll either push people away, be bitter, harsh, and hostile, or put your expectations on people. And as long as you keep misunderstanding the problem and the cause of that problem, you'll keep having that problem over and over and over again because you haven't cultivated the wisdom to solve it. So in these four simple statements, the Buddha explains the problem, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward of how to completely solve it. And when someone understands this and deeply reflects on it and verifies it for yourself, you can have a breakthrough to understanding finally once and for all what's causing your discontent feelings. And then you can actually apply the tools and techniques that the Buddha teaches in order to solve it. So what he did during his lifetime is he shared teachings that help you to attain that same mental state that he attained. He didn't teach rules and commandments. He didn't try to guilt, shame, or fear you into doing anything. He wasn't teaching belief and teaching you to believe things. He was teaching you the wisdom of these natural laws of existence, the things around you, and helping you to understand the world around you. He didn't explain that the way the world should be. He explained the way the world is. And by understanding the way the world is, now you can navigate this world more readily with understanding these natural laws of existence. If you lack wisdom of these natural laws, you will naturally make unwise decisions that lead to unwholesome results. But when you gain wisdom of these natural laws, you'll then naturally make wise decisions that produce wholesome results in your life. Just like you did with the natural law of gravity. At one time, none of us understood that as we were growing up, and we struggled with this natural law. So we fell down, we hit our head, we broke toys, we had all kinds of difficulties. But slowly but surely, we gained the wisdom of this natural law, and then we started making wiser decisions. We started tying our shoes tighter, we started looking at the surface of the sidewalk, we stopped jumping around, being so giddy all the time. We started gradually making wiser decisions that led to wholesome results. And that's because we awoke into the wisdom of the natural law of gravity. And we need to do the same thing with the natural laws of existence, to be able to see these natural laws of how the world is so that you no longer struggle and have difficulties in making decisions. Because when you're making decisions in the world, whatever decisions you make, you're going to experience the results of that. And if you're making wise decisions, you'll experience wholesome results. Whereas if you're making unwise decisions, you'll experience unwholesome results. But what an unenlightened mind will typically do is not only does it blame other people for the feelings that you experience, but when you experience unwholesome results in your life, you might blame other people for that as well, rather than realize that it's from your own decisions that produced any particular result. So the Buddha awakens to this wisdom of these natural laws, and he starts sharing them. One of the things that make a Buddha, or essentially the three criteria that make a Buddha, is that they independently discover the teachings that it takes to get to enlightenment, to this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. They independently discover it without the help of any teachers or any guides. Then, after they independently discover this and they train their own mind to get to enlightenment, The second thing that they do is they dedicate the rest of their life to sharing those independently discovered teachings with countless people. And then countless people get to enlightenment during their lifetime. Essentially, what a Buddha does during their lifetime is they lay down lights along the path, making it more and more clear for everybody to understand what it takes to get to enlightenment. And then the third thing that they do is they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So these are the three criteria of what makes a Buddha, is they get to enlightenment by themselves without any help of any teachers or any guides. They dedicate the rest of their life to sharing those independently discovered teachings so that countless people can get to enlightenment. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So Siddhartha Gautama meets all three of these criteria. And during his teaching career, more and more people start to understand that he's enlightened because more and more people are starting to get to enlightenment around him. While there was many teachers in the area that were teaching, their teachings didn't lead to enlightenment. Even though people were believing that they did, they didn't. But when a person arises that is a Buddha that becomes enlightened, there isn't a physical characteristic or a way for people to absolutely know that this person is a Buddha. It's not like their ear is turned a certain way or their nose is turned a certain way, and then everybody knows that, okay, that's an actual Buddha. Instead, an individual that is a Buddha, they don't go around and perform countless miracles in order to convince people that they are a Buddha. They're just going to share their independently discovered teachings. And then those people who are willing to do the work to independently reflect on those teachings and be able to see that they're true, then they can see the results that they're actually leading to enlightenment. So a Buddha would actually benefit from people not knowing that they're an actual Buddha. Because if people knew that he was a Buddha, they would come around and potentially be on their very best behavior. One of the powers and one of the strengths of a Buddha is that people don't know that he's a Buddha. And now a Buddha can observe the quality of mind of their students, and then the Buddha can help their students to understand how to improve the quality of their mind. So if a teacher can observe their student's mind in its natural state and is getting frustrated or agitated or annoyed or any other discontent feelings, then a teacher is more readily able to provide teachings that would help that person to eradicate those feelings. But if everybody knew that he was a Buddha, then he would have been hindered to be able to observe their mind and be able to offer them teachings that would actually help them. So during his lifetime, there were some people that knew he was a Buddha, who had learned with him closely, that knew his background, that they were experiencing enlightenment. They could tell that, yes, this person's a Buddha because he's going to be able to meet all three of these criteria. But then there were other people that didn't know he was an actual Buddha. So sometimes the teachers that were claiming that it was their teachings that lead to enlightenment would come to the Buddha and they would talk to him and try to kind of prove to the Buddha that it was their teachings that lead to enlightenment. And sometimes they would bring their students with them. And sometimes this teacher would get so agitated and so annoyed during the conversation and talking with the Buddha that they would storm off out of the conversation. And people would know, like, my teacher is not enlightened because they're getting angry, they're getting bitter, they're getting hostile. And an enlightened being doesn't experience that. So when that teacher would storm off, that teacher's students would then become students of the Buddha. Or sometimes the Buddha and this teacher would be talking and discussing the teachings that this teacher was convinced that the Buddha was enlightened, that teacher would then become a student of the Buddha and bring their students with them. So over this period of time, from the age of 35, when the Buddha gets to enlightenment, until the age of 80, when he dies, he shares his teachings into the world and countless people get to enlightenment. And it's an oral tradition that nothing was written down during his lifetime because the technology to capture things in written form wasn't in that part of the world yet. It existed in China, but it hadn't made its way to this area where the Buddha was, where he was born in what we refer to as Nepal, and he taught in what we refer to as Northeast India. But those lines didn't exist and those borders didn't exist 2,500 years ago. So he shared his teachings orally. And then every 2 weeks, his students would come together and they would recite his teachings word for word by chanting. This is where chanting came about. That's why it's not anything mystical or magical. It's not prayer or worship or anything like that. It was just a tool or technique that the Buddha used in order to help his students remember his teachings. And they would recite them every 2 weeks, word for word, so that then they could actually go out and practice them. It wasn't until after his death that they actually were able to start writing the teachings down. And that's why we now have the Pali Canon, which is the capturing of the teachings of the Buddha in the written form. So he teaches and countless people get to enlightenment. He dies at the age of 80. And then after his death, more and more people get to enlightenment because they were learning his teachings that were left behind with the people who had gotten to enlightenment. Because during his lifetime, countless people got to enlightenment. And when you get to enlightenment, the wisdom that leads to your enlightenment, you'll never forget that wisdom because it's deeply rooted in the mind. You're practicing those teachings very closely, and you have this deep, profound memory. What the Buddha essentially discovers is that there's these 10 pollutions that are in the mind, and when you uproot those pollutions and get them out of the mind performs optimally. This is why you have focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory by the time you get to enlightenment. But in the unenlightened state, your mind will be plagued by these pollutions, and you'll find it challenging to have clarity of mind, or to remember things, or to be focused or concentrated. But when you uproot these pollutions out of the mind, you can see that your mind's becoming more and more peaceful. So as I mentioned, the teachings of the Buddha, it's not about believing a bunch of things and then hoping that something good happens when you die. Instead, you're learning now, you're reflecting now to independently verify his teachings, and you're practicing the teachings now to transform your mind and uproot these pollutions. And since you're learning, reflecting, and practicing now in this life, you experience the results now in this life. You can see the condition of your mind and the condition of your life drastically improving. As your relationships improve and the condition of your mind's improving, you'll be able to see and know that these teachings are leading to an improved life for yourself. So this is what he does for the remaining time of his life. And after his death, more and more people get to enlightenment. And even today, there's people that are enlightened. And we can know that these people are enlightened. If you understand what enlightenment is, you can see these qualities in an individual's mind. What motivated him to go on this journey is the sickness, aging, and death, and seeing this despair in his community and in the population of people. And what he ultimately ends up discovering is the reason why people are so discontent during these periods of time is because the mind's craving permanence, wanting things to be permanent, longing, yearning, and expecting permanence. So when somebody's sick, if you're disgruntled or angry or any kind of frustration or agitation, it's because you're craving permanent health. You're wanting this body to be permanently healthy, when in reality, this body is impermanent. It can't be permanently healthy. And those activities that you do outside, when you go to work and you see your friends and you go hiking or bicycling or whatever else you do, you can't do those things permanently. But when the mind's craving permanence, longing, yearning, wanting these things to be permanent, when in reality you live in an impermanent world, your mind will be discontent because you're not getting what you want. If you get what you want, which is permanent health, you'll be happy. But you can't get permanent health because this body is impermanent. So now when you're not getting your cravings fulfilled, your longing, yearning is not fulfilled, you'll experience the agitation and the annoyance and other discontent feelings. And then the same thing is occurring with aging. That when you're aging, that you're craving this permanent youthfulness, not realizing that, this body is impermanent. It's going to experience aches and pains. It's going to have wrinkles, gray hair. You're going to be losing your hair. You're going to get, fat here and there as you age. But if you associate with this body as who you are as a person, and you think that this body is you, you might feel frustrated or agitated when you start seeing all these changes occurring in the body. But you need to understand that this body isn't permanent, that there's something called the universal truth of impermanence, that everything around you is impermanent. This is part of the discovery of the Buddha, that all these things are impermanent, but yet the mind is craving permanence. And then the same thing with death. that when you're getting close to death, or you have other people around you that are getting close to death, if your mind's craving permanence, you will struggle and have painful feelings. If you're holding on to this world, wanting this existence to be permanent, when you're getting close to death, you might struggle with that and experience painful feelings or even fear of death. Or when your people that are close to you, like your parents or your brothers and sisters or your friends, are dying. Maybe grandma or grandpa have died in your life and you really struggled in that situation. And you might have thought that it was love that was causing the grief or the misery or their sadness at the time of their death. But love doesn't cause grief and sadness. Love is a genuine interest in seeing another being be well. That doesn't cause sadness, or this active goodwill towards others. That doesn't cause sadness. Love isn't painful when you understand what love is. What's causing the sadness or the grief or the misery or the despair is the mind is craving for grandma and grandpa to be permanent, and they're not permanent. They are impermanent. Right? Or the mind is craving for mom or dad or brothers and sisters to be here permanently. And when your mind is confronted with this impermanence, which death is a significant amount of impermanence, that this being has now died, the unenlightened mind doesn't understand impermanence. It's holding on, it's clinging, it's craving, it's longing, it's yearning, it's wanting mom and dad to be permanent or grandma and grandpa to be permanent. And the mind's not getting what it wants, so it moves to this sadness or this frustration or this agitation. So you can eradicate all your discontent feelings when you train your mind and you eliminate the craving, the desire, the attachment, the longing, the yearning, the wanting things to be a certain way, understanding the universal truth of impermanence. And when the Buddha discovers this about the mind and how the mind's functioning, he also discovers this cycle of rebirth, this continuous rebirth over and over and over again. How when the mind has craving and it's holding on to this world, that an individual continues to be reborn over and over and over again. Even the cycle of rebirth, you don't believe this. This isn't something that you would ever believe, but you can independently verify through independently verifiable evidence that the cycle of rebirth is true. That's not something you usually approach when you first get started on the path to enlightenment, but it's something that as you develop and you get the core fundamental teachings underway and you start training your mind, you will ultimately probably get to a point where you'd like to dive into that topic to be able to independently confirm it. So the Buddha teaches, and you can independently confirm, that it's craving, desire, attachment in your mind that's causing the mind to experience discontentedness. And this is the same thing that's causing continuous rebirth. Because as long as you're holding on to various things in the world, wanting things to be a certain way, there's certain wisdom you haven't cultivated about this life. You'll keep coming back into the world over and over and over again until you cultivate the wisdom that you need to be able to escape this continuous rebirth. By the time you get to enlightenment, as you've been hearing me share, the mind is peaceful and joyful permanently for the rest of this life. You'll never experience anger, sadness, or frustration, or any of those discontent feelings ever again. It's physically impossible for the enlightened mind to experience anger or bitterness or hostility or any of those discontent feelings, which now, with a polluted mind, an individual will have difficulties with those feelings. But you can transcend all of that, and you can transform your mind to escaping that by learning, reflecting, and practicing the teachings of the Buddha. Essentially, what I'll end with, and then I'll just open up to whatever questions you guys have, is that no one ever said that life would be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. Right? Oftentimes, life feels very tough in the unenlightened state. You struggle, you have difficulties because you don't understand necessarily the natural laws of existence. You have a lack of wisdom. So life doesn't feel easy, but it feels tough, right? So nobody ever said life is going to be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. When you learn and practice Gotama Buddha's teachings, it's not easy to learn and practice his teachings. It's challenging to go on this journey to enlightenment. But by the time you get to enlightenment, it will ensure that life is not tough. Because by the time your mind is transformed uprooting these pollutions and you're practicing the teachings, life is at ease. You don't have any difficult relationships. You're not struggling. You're not having sadness and anger and frustration. If you think about all those times where you were angry and feeling miserable and feeling guilty and shameful and all those other feelings, it takes an enormous amount of time in your life to be frustrated and agitated. It takes a lot of energy. You can feel exhausted at the end of your day sometimes when you go out into the world. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you no longer experience exhaustion. You need to sleep and you feel sleepy, but you don't feel exhausted. If you go out into the world with a bunch of cravings, wanting things to be a certain way, if you get things your way, you'll come home and you'll say, oh, it was such a great day. I had a wonderful day. That's because you might have gotten pretty much the things that you wanted in that day. But then if you go out into the world with certain cravings, wanting things to be a certain way, and you don't get things your way, you'll come home and feel like it was a miserable day. It was a horrible day. You might be exhausted, feeling like you have heavy bricks on your shoulders or heavy bricks on your legs and on your ankles, and you might feel like you're just dragging. This is because of the mind's pollution and the craving, desire, attachment. But when you uplift all of that, uprooted out of the mind, life gets to the point where it's not difficult anymore. It's easy. It's very straightforward. So this difficult human existence that we talk about in the path to enlightenment, yeah, it's very difficult in the unenlightened state to be in a human existence. But the more you cultivate your mind and you gain wisdom and you train your mind and you uproot the pollutions out of the mind, it's no longer difficult to exist in the human existence. And you can experience the peace and joy of the mind, no longer experiencing the anger, frustration, and all those other discontent feelings. So I'll just end here and open up to any questions that you guys have related to the life story of Gotama Buddha or his journey to enlightenment or the path to enlightenment. We can talk about anything and everything that you guys would like to talk about. Again, here at the temple, if you guys would like to ask questions, if you wouldn't mind just getting a mic here in the white bowl, there's a little gray switch. You can turn that on and hold it up towards your chin and be able to ask any questions that you like. That way we'll hear you at the temple, and those people who are online will be able to hear you as well. And those of you guys that are online, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions through the comment section. I'll be able to see that. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions, and I'll be able to help you that way. So is there any questions that you guys have? Yes, ma'am. If you wouldn't mind getting a microphone there, and then you can just keep it with you and pass it around to the people with you. By the way, I should share, for those of you guys that haven't been here before, there's a bathroom in the very back of the room, the last door on the right. You're welcome to get up and use that at any point. We even have water here that is provided by our students. And there's even bathrooms outside the classroom. If you follow the signs, you can go to the main bathrooms in the temple. So feel free to come and go as you please, or use the restroom as you like, or help yourself to water. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Thank you for the sharing. Mm-hmm. I wonder, if everything is impermanent, how about enlightenment?
Yeah, so the Buddha never taught that everything is impermanent, but everything in the world in terms of the material objects. There's something called conditioned objects and unconditioned objects. What a conditioned object is you'll notice that it arises, it changes, and then it fades away. What a unconditioned object is it doesn't arise, it doesn't change, and it doesn't fade away. So all the things in the material world are conditioned objects. So like this carpet, at one time it wasn't a carpet. It was other bits and pieces. It arose as a carpet. People put it together. And now it is, as it arose as a carpet, now it changes. It gets stains, the fabric wears off, and then over time it's going to fade away, that it's no longer going to be a carpet. Just like this physical body. It arose, it changes, and then it's going to fade away. So this is a conditioned object. All the things around you, your relationships, your wealth or income, your job, this physical body, the weather, all these things are all impermanent. This is called a conditioned object. There's some condition that is producing this thing, so it's going to arise, it's going to change and fade away. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're experiencing what's called an unconditioned mental state. In the unenlightened state, you have a conditioned mind. Your mind is conditioned by certain pollutions. So you experience the arising of feelings, the changing of feelings and the fading away of feelings. Your happiness, your excitement, your elation, it arises, it changes, and it fades away because it's based on some condition. If it's sunny outside, you'll be happy. But then that sun is impermanent. So when it changes, your mind moves to the sadness. That happiness arises, changes, and fades away. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you've uprooted the conditions that are causing this to occur. And now your mind is unconditioned. You have an unconditioned mind where you don't need any conditions to be met. And you can just always be peaceful and joyful. So in the unenlightened state, for example, if your mom does this, if your boss does this, if your bank account is this, if the weather is this, if these certain things happen, then you'll be happy. But when those things change, then you'll be sad or angry or frustrated. That's what the conditioned mind is experiencing, conditional feelings that arise, change, and fade away. By the time you get to enlightenment, none of this exists anymore. You just have unconditioned peacefulness and joy. There doesn't need to be any condition met to experience the peace and joy. So in the unenlightened state, you might see it's sunny outside, get so happy, but then when it rains, you get frustrated or sad. In the enlightened state, you're already happy before you saw it was sunny outside. You're already joyful. And then you see it's sunny outside. It's like, sweet, I'm going to go outside and spend time with my friends and we're going to go hiking. This will be great. This is going to be so fun. Then you go take a shower and you come out and now it's raining. And as an enlightened being, it's like, all right, well, it's raining. Maybe I'll invite my friends over. We can have dinner. I'll cook them dinner. Or maybe we can go to the mall. Maybe I'll stay home and read a book. No big deal. It's raining. And you can maintain your joy. But in the unenlightened state, you'll get frustrated and agitated in those kinds of situations where you don't get what you want. So the reason why enlightenment is permanent is because your mind is unconditioned. The conditions that are causing those temporary feelings no longer exist. They've been uprooted out of the mind. So now you experience this unconditioned peace, calm, serenity, contentedness with joy, where your mind's not going up and down like in the unenlightened state. Your mind's just always peaceful, always joyful, always happy. You have this unconditioned happiness. Yeah, you're welcome. Looks like we have some more questions here as well. Just takes a second. Once you turn it on, the light will come on.
Okay, so thank you for your teaching. And you said a Buddha is a type of person who learned by himself and then teach for the rest of his life. So my question is there several Buddha or there is only one Buddha?
So some places where you go, they will tell you that you're a Buddha and that everybody's a Buddha and that when you get to enlightenment, you will be a Buddha. But this isn't what the Buddha said. This is what people are saying nowadays. The Buddha talked about how rare it is that a Buddha comes into the world. The last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago, and it was Gotama Buddha, this individual who was originally named Siddhartha Gotama. We refer to him as Gotama Buddha or the Buddha, and other cultures have other ways to refer to him. I think China has a certain name, and Bangladesh and different people refer to him different ways, but a Buddha is meeting those three primary criteria that I mentioned, that they get to enlightenment by themselves, they dedicate their life to sharing their teachings, countless people get to enlightenment, and then they preserve their teachings for other individuals. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, there's the documentation in the Pali Canon that explains to us what he taught. And there's only one conflict that I ever see in the Pali Canon. I know that during the lifetime of the Buddha, he never contradicted himself during his teachings. But when they documented the teachings, the individuals who are documenting the teachings, and they've been handed down for 2,500 years, there's been people that have made certain changes here and there. And there's this conflict where you can see where the Buddha is documented as having talked about other Buddhas having existed before him. You can see this in the Pali Canon. But then there's this teaching where the Buddha says that this path to enlightenment, that he discovered it. He says that I am the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of this path to enlightenment, and it was undeclared before me. meaning there wasn't any Buddhas before him. And I suspect that this is actually the truth, because when you understand the path to enlightenment, you understand that there's a certain intellectual understanding that you need to have that needs to be communicated intellectually. But then, of course, there's the reflection, and then there's the practice to really transform the mind. And prior to 2,500 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, us human beings, we were still working on developing language. We weren't really able to communicate deep thoughts and the things that it really takes to be able to understand the path to enlightenment. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, language had developed enough where he could communicate these deep thoughts, but it hadn't developed enough to actually write them down until after his death. So I suspect that we as human beings didn't have the capability to communicate the path to enlightenment prior to Gotama Buddha, because language hadn't developed enough to that point. So I suspect that the teaching where he says, I'm the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before me, that's the truth. And I think that these other teachings where the Buddha is documented as having talked about previous Buddhas is most likely not the truth. And it may be a change or modification that people made along the way. But in reality, while this is a very interesting topic and this question comes up frequently, it really doesn't matter if there were Buddhas before him or not, because right now your mind is discontent. You're experiencing sadness and anger and fears and frustration and guilt and shame and all these different feelings, and you need to eliminate it. And it's these teachings of the Buddha that will help you to do that. And if there were people that were Buddhists before him, okay, great, that's fine. If there weren't, okay, that's fine too. But it is a very interesting topic, and it's the only place that I see a conflict in the teachings of the Buddha in terms of what was documented in the Pali Canon. But I know during his lifetime, he wouldn't have contradicted himself, because by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind has deep wisdom and you profoundly know what it takes to get to enlightenment, and you're only sharing the truth. So you don't contradict yourself. In that 45 years of him teaching, he would have never contradicted himself. But of course, the people who wrote it down and maybe modified it later, they're going to contradict themselves. So yeah, great question. Any other questions that you guys have? Yeah, go ahead if you like. Yeah, there's more mics you guys can pass around.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the lecture. I was wondering, so the one of the monk training is going to maybe in Chiang Mai, going to the market or going to the street in the early morning, and so get some food for the day. So I think there are a lot of meaning. So exactly the Buddha had to bake some food. So the style is kind of taken after to the monk, and then so sorry. My question is, what's the kind of main purpose to go to the street or the market, and then so ask food to the people?
Sure. So the first thing I'll share, and then we'll get deeper into it, is that I don't suggest that you think about the ordained practitioners as begging for food, or the Buddha begged for food, because if you're begging, there's a craving there, there's a longing, there's a yearning, like pleading with people to give you food. This isn't what the ordained practitioners do or what Gotama Buddha did.
Sorry, so maybe I don't know. So
you don't have to apologize. This is a common thing that people think, is that there's begging going on. And I just would like to clarify it for you so you understand it, and you can see the true reality of what they're doing. Is they're walking down the street and they're providing the opportunity for the household practitioners to practice generosity, where when you're practicing generosity, you're giving and sharing more than is strictly required in any given situation without any expectation of anything in return. And when you're practicing generosity, it's helping you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. That craving, desire, attachment is what's causing the mind to be discontent. All those discontent feelings is coming from one's own mind. So when you have craving, desire, attachment, you tend to be selfish and you hold on to things very tightly. because the mind's clinging to various things. So when you practice breathing mindfulness meditation, it's training the mind to let go. But also when you're practicing generosity, it's training your mind to let go. So regularly, people are taught, and people can choose to practice or not. It's up to them to practice generosity, where you're giving and you're sharing your time, your effort, your energy, and your resources. So the ordained practitioners are walking down the street, providing that opportunity for the household practitioners. And it's up to them whether they choose to give them food or not. For the ordained practitioners, what they're practicing in that situation is they're also practicing the elimination of craving, desire, attachment. One of the strongest cravings, desires, attachments that a human being typically has is what's called central desire, the longing, yearning through the mind and through the tongue. There's other central desires through the eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, in the mind itself, that the mind is longing and yearning for things to be permanently comfortable. And one of the desires that you might have is through the tongue of wanting certain flavors and certain tastes to hit the tongue. So you might go out and you might actively seek certain foods that taste a certain way. And when you get the tastes or flavors that you like, you might be happy or excited. But when you taste a flavor that you don't like, you might get agitated or frustrated or annoyed. And this is all because of the central desire in the mind. So an individual walking down the street holding a bowl, they're just accepting whatever food's given to them. They're not choosing what food that they're going to eat. And now when they go back to the temple and they're eating that food, they have to train their mind to just eat it and look at food as a way to nourish your body. What you might look at food as is as a way to please the tongue and please the mind. This is what the mind does when it has central desire. But by the time you eliminate central desire and you train your mind to eliminate that, you can be peaceful and joyful no matter what food you eat, no matter what the taste is. And you realize that food isn't to please the tongue and please the mind, it's to sustain the health of the body. That's the only reason why we eat food. But with that central desire, you'll have longing and yearning, and you'll like these foods and you'll dislike these foods. And now what you'll try to do with aversion is you'll push away these undesirable foods, thinking that that's going to solve your problem. But it doesn't, because it's only a matter of time before you get some food that you don't like, because you can't permanently get food that you like. Because of the universal truth of impermanence, you're someday going to eat food that doesn't taste particularly well. And with that central desire in your mind, you'll be frustrated and agitated or annoyed in that situation. But if you can uproot this out of your mind, where you no longer view food as pleasing the tongue and pleasing the mind, you can get to a point where you can be peaceful and joyful no matter what food that you eat. And rather than push away foods that you dislike, what I would encourage you to do is actually eat those foods. So if there's certain fruits or certain vegetables or certain substances of food that you despise and that you don't like, if you put the mind in that situation where you're eating those things, you're going to need to train the mind to be peaceful and joyful during those times. So that's a way to expose your mind to these foods, and then eventually get to the point where you're eating any and all foods. You don't have a craving desire for one particular food or another. Now, you will enjoy certain foods when you're enlightened. You'll eat a piece of chocolate cake and you'll be like, wow, that's a really good piece of chocolate cake. But you won't cling to it. You won't hold on to it, craving it to be permanent. So when you go to this restaurant, if they have your chocolate cake, great, I'll eat the chocolate cake. But if they've run out of your chocolate cake, you're fine with that too. You're like, you know what? I'm fine. I don't need any chocolate cake, right? Maybe you get a piece of apple pie, or maybe you get some fruits, or maybe you get no dessert whatsoever. But when you're craving that chocolate cake, you'll be agitated or irritated when they don't have it. So this is helping the household practitioners to practice generosity, eliminate craving, desire, attachment. It's helping the ordained practitioners to eliminate their central desire. And then what's underlying all of this is what the Buddha refers to as mutual support. In order for you to get to enlightenment, you're going to need teachers and guides to help you, because you're not a Buddha. You can't get to enlightenment by yourself. So there's people like us who have given up worldly life in pursuit of a career, and we've decided to now teach and share the teachings. But we need to sustain our life somehow. So what students do is they will sometimes offer us food or clothing or shelter or medical care or financial support to be able to provide you the teachings that you need in order to help you get access to the teachings. So by us giving up our worldly life and choosing to no longer have a career, it allows us to fully get into the practice of the teachings of the Buddha and then prepare things like classes and things like this so that then we can share the teachings with you. And then when we share the teachings with you, this helps you to improve your life, improve your relationships, improve your career and everything else that you're involved in. And now you might decide that because somebody has practiced generosity, that you would like to also practice generosity with them and then share some things with them to help them. So there's this mutual support that's happening to ensure that the teachings continue in the world. And that's why an individual would walk down the street and accept whatever food is given to them.
Thank you so much. So I feel like so kind of win-win situation. So the monk side and so our kind of if I categorize our side. So the monk train. So it's what you mentioned, and also our side also should be kind of generous, and then so should be not shouldn't be what I'm sorry, I forgot the word. Anyway, so the both sides has a really lot of beneficial stuff.
Yes. Essentially, what you can think about is you can think about the monastery or like the ability to ordain. You can think about that like the womb of a woman. The womb of a woman is like the perfect environment for a fetus to grow and develop. And that is created, by the womb of a woman. Well, household practitioners are providing that womb for individuals to enter into and grow and develop and get to enlightenment. And as people are able to do that, then they're able to share the teachings with you so that you can get to enlightenment. You don't need to ordain in order to get to enlightenment, but by somebody choosing to give up worldly life and move fully into learning and practicing the teachings, now 100% of their time is devoted to learning and practicing the teachings. They're not out there maintaining a house or a car or a career or something like that. They're just fully into learning and developing their own practice so that then they can cultivate the wisdom to then share that back with you. So there's this mutual support, this exchange that is happening, that by students supporting a teacher to grow and develop and understand the teachings, as that person becomes more and more wise and more enlightened, then they have the teachings to be able to share back with the community to help individuals to get to enlightenment. So that's that mutual support and benefit that is occurring.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We have a couple different questions. I think he had raised his hand earlier. Yeah. If you could turn your mic off, Junko, I think it might have a little static in there. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I have two questions.
Sure.
You said Buddha did only one miracle.
Only what?
One miracle.
Oh, yes. One miracle.
Yeah, sorry. But Buddha was a human and experienced enlightenment. But my miracle refers to God because it's something who is not possible for human. So this is my first question: why put a miracle into philosophy like Buddhism, who just from one normal people experience enlightenment, who become a Buddha? Why putting miracle into the story? And which leads to my second question. I read some books about Buddhism from Matthew Ricard. I don't know if you know him, who teach the same lessons than you about Buddhism, like the enlightenment, how to get away the bad experience, bad feelings, and the attachment to things. But when I came to Asia, I see how Buddhism become kind of religion, because when we ask some people what do they say and what do they do when they go to the temple, and they say we ask for good health good fortune or good for the family or for themselves. And they put also Buddha on the statue of Buddha on the upstairs, like above us. And it was not what I expected from Buddhism, because for me it was only a way to reach enlightenment, and not like becoming a religion. Like, I don't know how and why it kind of takes the same point of religions and other religion, like prayer, like ask belief to ask good heirs, good chance for the family, for themselves, and put Buddha in higher positions than people, like a god. So it's just like, I know it's not the way of Buddhism, like how he wanted it to be, like you explained, but I would like to know how it became like that.
Sure. So when a Buddha awakens to enlightenment, they actually benefit from people not knowing that they're a Buddha, but they need kind of an initial group of people to understand that they're a Buddha, so that those initial people can kind of potentially contribute to that Buddha being able to be successful in the world. But by and large, a Buddha has enough wisdom to go into the world and share their teachings in a way that people don't need to know that they're a Buddha in order to help them get to enlightenment. So initially, when a Buddha awakens to enlightenment, they're going to perform a miracle so that a certain group of people know that they're a Buddha, but then all the other people, they don't necessarily know that that person's a Buddha. They're just learning and practicing to develop their mind. So a Buddha is performing that miracle, and yes, it's God that helps this miracle and creates this miracle, making it appear as if it's from this human being. The Buddha never said that there isn't a God. Sometimes people think that this is the case. They think that the Buddha rejected God or said that there isn't a God or anything like this. But the Buddha actually talked about God at different times in his teachings. He just doesn't put God as a central role in his teachings, because God isn't the one who determines whether you get to enlightenment or not. It's based on your decisions of whether you get to enlightenment. God's not controlling the world, determining what is or isn't happening. It's your decisions that are leading to some certain result. This is a topic that I taught last week on Sunday about God, to help people understand that you can either have a relationship with God or not. It's up to you. You're not required to have that in order to get to enlightenment. It's your decisions that lead to certain things. So depending on what you've been taught about God, oftentimes people misunderstand this being God. And it's important to understand that the Buddha did teach about this being, but he didn't make it a central figure in his teachings. So a Buddha is going to perform a miracle so that an initial group of people can understand that they're a Buddha. And then from that point forward, they're going to teach countless people who don't necessarily know that they're an actual Buddha. Then in terms of what you're seeing here in Asia and other parts of the world as well, this is impermanence. That impermanence has even affected the teachings of the Buddha, that there's what the Buddha taught during his lifetime that leads to enlightenment. And now 2,500 years later, there's what some people choose to do, which is oftentimes very different than what the Buddha taught. So even though you heard from me that there's no rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship in the teachings of the Buddha, you might go into a Buddhist temple and that's exactly what you see is rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. But these are individuals who haven't learned the original teachings of the Buddha, and that's why they're doing those things. If you get back to the original teachings of the Buddha, which I refer to as the words of the Buddha, this book series that I share is called The Words of the Buddha. If you get back to his original teachings, you can see what he did teach and what he didn't teach. And then you're encouraged not to believe this, but instead to learn it, to reflect on it, to independently verify it and practice it. And as you do, that's where you see that you can independently verify the teachings that are shared by the Buddha, his original teachings. You can verify that they're true, and then you can practice them, and you can see as you uproot the pollutions out of your mind that your mind's becoming more peaceful and more joyful. And it doesn't include the things that you were mentioning that you're observing in a lot of places. Now, 2,500 years later, we're kind of at a low point with the teachings of the Buddha. And the Buddha predicted this during his lifetime. He explained that this is what would occur, that there would be these 500-year cycles that his teachings would go through, and essentially they would gradually degrade. And he explained what those 500-year cycles are. And it's exactly what happened, exactly the way he said it would happen. And now we're at this low point where very few people in the world understand his original teachings because they're not learning with his original words. If you get back to what a Buddha taught, that's what actually leads to enlightenment. All the changes and modifications that people made, that doesn't lead to enlightenment. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, they're essentially laying down lights along the path to illuminate the path, making it as clear as possible for people to get to enlightenment. But then over 2,500 years, people knock over the lights, people put out the candles, people, create this murkiness of the path, and then people kind of veer off to one side or the other. But if you can get back to the original teachings of the Buddha, which is what I share in all the books and audiobooks and online classes, the classes, courses, retreats that I teach here, the various ways that I help people to learn the teachings of the Buddha, you can understand what he did teach and what he didn't teach, and then you'll know the truth for yourself, because you're on this independent journey to enlightenment. It's not about what other people are doing. So if somebody goes to a temple and they kneel down at a statue and they bow to the statue and they're feeding the statue, maybe they're sprinkling water on the statue, maybe they're praying to the statue, that's what that person's doing, and that's their practice, what's going on in their mind. But if you understand the original teachings of the Buddha, you know that that's not what leads to enlightenment, and you would choose to not do those things. And that's okay, because not everybody's going to do exactly the same thing because of the universal truth of impermanence. So the more you get in touch with what the Buddha originally taught, you'll see the truth that his teachings work, and it leads exactly where he said they do, to this peaceful and joyful mental state. You had a question?
Do you think the meditation is the only way to go to enlightenment?
You need more than just meditation. But in terms of the path to enlightenment that the Buddha taught, you would need to do meditation in order to get to enlightenment. Without meditation, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. But there's other things you need besides meditation as well. It's not just meditation. You need to intellectually understand all the various teachings about the natural laws of existence. You need to be able to reflect on those, to independently verify them, and then you need to practice them. Part of that practice is meditation, but then there's other things you're practicing too. So for example, if you meditated 23 hours a day, which you wouldn't be able to do, but let's just say you would, if you meditated for 23 hours a day and you went outside for 1 hour per day and you were bitter and harsh and hostile with people through your intentions, your speech, and your actions, and you're causing harm in the world, you're not going to get to enlightenment. You're not going to experience enlightenment, because all this harm you're causing in the world is just coming back to you. So yes, you would need to meditate in order to get to enlightenment the way that the Buddha taught, but you would also need other teachings as well, because you're practicing the teachings from the moment that you wake up until the moment that you fall asleep, that you're practicing. Every moment you're practicing the teachings. You're meditating at certain times during the day, but then you're practicing the teachings at other times as well, which you haven't fully learned the entire path to enlightenment. The core central teaching of the Buddha is called the Eightfold Path. There are 8 individual factors that you learn, and you learn this through the original words of the Buddha. And one aspect of that path is meditation, but then there's other factors of things that you need to learn and develop and be practicing on a daily basis.
Because I'm a dancer and I experience a lot of flow that happen same when I meditate. So I'm asking because I'm wondering what's a meditation like take place into this, because I found a lot of somatic movement, or you bring mindful movements into the dance or into the body connections. It actually can help to achieve the same statement while I meditate. So that's why I asked.
Yeah. So you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment through just dancing, right? Just like you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment through just meditation. But there's certain improved qualities of mind that come no matter what hobby or activity you're doing. There's certain improvements that you're creating, like, doing certain activities. You can cultivate more concentration or more mindfulness. These are qualities that you need on the path to enlightenment. But in order to get to enlightenment, you would need to understand what meditation is and be able to practice that. What meditation is it's a dedicated active, purposeful training session where you're either eliminating certain unwholesome qualities from the mind and or cultivating certain wholesome qualities in the mind, doing that in the seated, lying, standing, or walking positions. So there are certain qualities of mind that you're cultivating. And when I teach meditation in a thorough way through the various courses and retreats that I share, I show you what are the wholesome qualities you're cultivating and what are the unwholesome qualities that you're eliminating while you're actually meditating. So you would need to understand those particular meditations that the Buddha taught because they're addressing certain pollutions that are in the mind. And then if you're choosing to dance or go on walks or exercise or all these things, it's great for the body and it can affect the mind as well. But you're going to need to have meditation in order to get to enlightenment. You can't get to the same exact qualities of mind that you're getting in meditation in something like dance. While there's an improvement that you can see, and that's why you enjoy doing it potentially, and other reasons too, you wouldn't be able to get exactly the same qualities of mind that you cultivate in meditation with something like dance or something else associated like that, some hobby or activity. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if we have any questions here online. Okay, any more questions here at the temple? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was wondering, the fact of wanting to teach and wanting to share your knowledge, isn't it a kind of craving as well?
So you need to understand how we define craving, desire, attachment, or wanting or expectations. This is the mind longing, yearning, craving, desiring, thinking that the next new shiny object waiting around the corner is going to provide some lasting satisfaction. This is the mind pulling towards something. That's the wanting. But instead, what you would like to cultivate is where you have a certain goal, a certain objective, or a certain interest, right? So it's not the activity itself. It's not the teaching in your example that is the craving, desire, attachment. It's what's going on in the mind. For example, if I had a craving and a longing and yearning that everybody who came to class and started class, they have to stay here. And if they don't stay, I'll be discontent, right? Because the mind is longing and yearning for this person to be here, wanting this person to be here. But if you understand impermanence, that everybody's got different things going on in their life and they're here for different reasons, then you can be comfortable with people coming and going in and out of your class. Where if you're craving for something or you're wanting something, you'll chase it and you'll pursue it. But also if you are indifferent and you could care less what goes on in your life, you're not going to experience peace and joy either there. So you can do things in life as a goal, as an objective or interest. It's what's going on in the mind that determines that. It's not the object itself. So let's use a different example. Let's use something like a mobile phone. You could be attached to this mobile phone, that you're holding on to it. Anytime somebody messages you, you message them right back. If you lose it or it breaks or you leave it at home, you might have frustration or agitation or fear that arises because you don't have this phone with you or that it breaks because the mind's clinging to it, wanting it to be permanent. But you can also have a mobile phone and just understand that, yeah, it's impermanent. Sometimes you're going to have it, sometimes you're not. You don't have to be fixated to it. It's going to break eventually, or it's going to get stolen, or you're going to misplace it, or something like this is going to occur. So you can have an object like a mobile phone and not be attached to it. So you can do something like teaching without wanting to teach. So I don't want to teach you. I don't want it. I don't long for it. I don't yearn for it. I'm interested in teaching you. I would like to teach you. I would like to help you, but I can only help somebody who chooses that they would like help. So I show up here, and if there's students here, then I will teach you and I will help you to learn the path to enlightenment. If I show up here and there's no students who come, okay, I just go home. I maintain the joy. Whereas if I wanted to teach, when I showed up, if there was no students here, I'd be angry, I'd be frustrated, I'd be agitated. So you can get to this point in your life with all the various aspects of your life where you're not wanting and longing and yearning and desiring and craving and yearning for things to be a certain way, but also you're not indifferent and could care less either. You make wise decisions to pursue a goal, an objective, or interest. So it's possible to teach and do any other thing in your life as a goal, objective, or interest without a longing, yearning, and chasing after it. So it's important to understand what a craving, desire, attachment is to be able to understand how to navigate the world and now do things in your life through a goal, objective, or interest. Where in the unenlightened state, what we typically understand is to do things out of craving, of what we want. And this is language that you'll hear used a lot with the unenlightened mind. But you won't hear me say, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want you to do that. Even with my son and my wife and other people like this, I don't use this word want because I don't want anything, right? I don't expect anything from anybody. I just have a goal, an objective, or interest to share these teachings. And if people are interested in those, great, I'll share them. And if they're not interested, that's fine too. And you can maintain your joy, maintain your peacefulness. But if you wanted it, you wouldn't be able to maintain your joy because you can only be happy when you get what you want.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for teaching. The middle way seems very subjective to me. What you perceive to be middle way and what I perceive to be way.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
The middle way seems very subjective. What we could all have a different middle way, I guess. What part do the sort of precepts or I think I'm using that word correctly, the precepts, can that inform us as to what is a middle way? And also the role of maybe austerity or asceticism and discipline. This all seems quite vague to me when I think about it and I try to apply this to my own life. It seems to strive for discipline and training of the mind. It's quite a hard fight for me, but an undisciplined life is readily at hand any given moment. Mm-hmm. So I wonder about some of the precepts. Does that inform what I may design as a middle path? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, it's such a thought-provoking lesson. I have so many thoughts. I'm just trying to form a coherent question, but about that, the middle path, how to live that way without veering into, because asceticism and austerity to me is often very attractive, and the way modern world is structured, it becomes more and more attractive every year, really. We tend to think that the more stuff we have or money or things is the measure of a good and happy life. Each year goes by, I can see that that's not right, but so I can go down the road and thinking, well, is perhaps, better. Of course it's not. I catch myself and I think, no, that's not right either. So I don't know if there's a question in there. Yeah, something about, do the precepts inform us how to live well?
Okay, so these are two different things, primarily the middle way versus the 5 precepts. So I'll help you see the difference there and how both of these things help you on the journey to enlightenment. So you're right, the middle way is actually subjective in terms of how you practice this. So let's use an example like generosity, since we're talking a little bit about generosity. Generosity is that giving and sharing of more than is strictly required in any given situation, with sharing your time, your effort, your energy, your resources without any expectation of anything in return. And there's a middle way for that, for each individual, which is going to be different depending on what we have going on in our life. That middle way, when we get to the middle way in terms of sharing, we will feel at peace. We will feel at ease. We'll feel like the mind has taken a breath. So for example, at one time in my life, I was a business person and I was making lots and lots and lots of money. And I would give about $1,000 a month to the local temple where I lived. And I wasn't even going to that temple to learn or anything like that. But I knew that that would be helpful for the people there to be able to get access to what it is that they were getting access to. So as a business person, I was sharing about $1,000 a month with those folks. Then as I shut down my businesses and I started doing what I'm doing now, I don't have $1,000 a month to give to anybody. So I don't share $1,000 a month anymore. My middle way with generosity had needed to adjust in terms of financial generosity. Now what I share is I share my time and my effort and my energy because I have that in surplus. But the financials, I don't have as much in surplus, so I'm not able to share in that regard. So I can share with some, when I go places, I tip or I give money to people or give food to orphans and different people and help and practice generosity and giving things, but not in the same way as I did before. So that middle way with generosity needed to ebb and flow and change and adjust for me within my own life. It needed to ebb and flow because it's impermanent, right? The middle way, it's going to be impermanent. So once you find the middle way with any particular topic, you'll notice that your mind will be at ease and there'll be peacefulness there. But then you need to adjust and throttle that as you go through life so that I'm not craving to be so generous like I was in the past with my money, because if I was still doing that and holding on to that, I would deplete my resources and I wouldn't be able to sustain my own life. So this middle way is generally taught about finding what's right for you in the middle in terms of things like generosity and things of this nature. And that's will help you to apply to all aspects of your life, whether it's spending time with your friends or family. You got to find the middle way. Sometimes you'll be able to spend more time with them, sometimes less time, depending on what you've got going on in your life. But when you're spending whatever amount of time you are with your friends or family, when it feels right, you'll be at ease, you'll be peaceful. And when you're spending time on your own to do the things that you need to do, you'll feel peaceful there too. But if you get that out of balance, then you're not going to feel peaceful. Essentially, what the middle way is teaching is a balanced life and finding that middle way for yourself. And then observe that, because it's going to ebb and flow as you go through life. That's the middle way. And you can apply it to your finances, your friends and family, the time you spend, your career, how much time you spend on maintaining your house or your car or anything like this. You can apply this middle way. What the precepts are helping you to understand is the natural laws of existence, the natural law of Gotama. The Buddha is showing you cause and effect. The precepts are things about like killing or stealing or sexual misconduct or lying or intoxicants. What the Buddha is showing you throughout all of his teachings is he's showing you this cause and effect, or this action and result. Some people call it karma. I refer to it as Gotama because in the original teachings of the Buddha, they're in the Pali language, which uses this word Gotama. And if it translated to just one English word, I would use that one English word because it would be much easier for you, but it doesn't. So I need to describe it as cause and effect, or action and result. It's the results of your decisions. That's what your Gotama is. So that if you're polite, kind, friendly, or respectful, people will tend to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful with you. But if you're impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful, people will tend to be that way with you. That's your Gotama. That's the results of your decisions. So when you make wise decisions, it will produce wholesome Gotama. And when you make unwise decisions, it will produce unwholesome Gotama based on your decisions. So same thing as if you kill in the world, then people are going to be interested in killing you and injuring you, or you'll go to jail or any other difficult problems, right? You'll have guilt or shame or fear perhaps in the mind based on your unwise decision to go off in the world and kill and take the life of another human being. This is going to produce unwholesome results for you. And the same thing with stealing or sexual misconduct or lying or intoxicants. And the Buddha goes into a lot of detail of what these things are, because the term sexual misconduct, right now you might not understand what that means, but the Buddha actually goes through and describes it and explains it to you in detail of what that means. And it's basically harmful conduct where you're causing harm, like rape or sex without consent or sex with minors, going outside of a relationship that you're in. These are all going to cause harm to others. So you can dive into the 5 precepts where the Buddha is explaining to you this cause and effect and action and result, so that then you'll make wise decisions about what you experience in life. They're not rules or commandments, or he's not trying to force you to do anything. He's just helping you see this natural law of Gotama. And as you're learning that natural law of Gotama and you're practicing it, not only are you experiencing better results in your life because you're making wise decisions that produce wholesome results, but it's working to eliminate those pollutions in your mind. One of the pollutions that are in the unenlightened mind is something called ill will, or anger, hatred, ill will, and then the lesser versions like frustration, agitation, and annoyance. So if you're killing, there needs to be a certain amount of anger and hatred in the mind to be able to produce that. But if you're restraining the mind and not allowing the mind to do that, you're cultivating a certain amount of compassion for other beings and loving kindness for other beings. So these precepts, while they're exposing you to the natural law of Gotama, it's also helping you to reduce certain pollutions in your mind. So for example, if you're stealing, there's a certain amount of craving, a certain amount of longing, yearning to have things, and the mind isn't patient to work and apply effort to be able to acquire those things for yourself. And you're causing harm to this other being by stealing their property. So by you choosing to see the cause and effect that stealing would lead to unwholesome results for other people, and it would lead to unwholesome results to you, and you can train your mind to eliminate craving and anger, for example. Now by arising wisdom, you're going to experience improved results in your life. So the middle way is subjective, like you said. It's based on your life and practicing generosity. One time you might be able to practice it here, and another way you might be able to practice it over here. But with these natural laws of existence, when you're unenlightened, the mind has difficulty seeing these natural laws and understanding the natural law of Gotama. But the more you study it to learn it, the more you reflect on it to independently verify it and then practice it, it becomes very clear to you of exactly what would be wise or unwise in any given situation. So you could give me any situation that you describe to me, and I could tell you exactly how I would handle that situation. But that doesn't mean that's the way you're going to handle it in that situation, because the variables are going to be different. So when a student comes to me and says, "Hey, David, I'm struggling with this decision. Here's what I'm thinking about, and here's what I'm looking at in terms of the situation, and here's what I'm thinking about doing in my decisions," I would listen to that, and then I would say, okay, well, here's what I see. You could do it this way, and here's the results that you'll experience. But you could do it this way, and here's the results that you would experience. The decision's up to you, because only you know 100% of the variables in any given situation and what would be best in your situation. So a teacher is here to advise you on the natural law of Gotama, helping you see that cause and effect. But then each individual student needs to do that deep reflection in figuring out what would be wise in their life. And this is how you awaken to the wisdom of the natural law of Gotama. But in each situation, it's going to be a bit different. So that's why if somebody describes a situation to me, I could handle that situation in one way today, but based on other variables, I might handle it a different way in another situation. So talking about the middle way and this natural law of Gotama, if you're walking down the street and I see a homeless person, in some situations I might offer them food or water or clothing or something else. But in another situation, maybe I'm unable to do that, and I don't do that. And I just smile and be polite and just walk past them, right? So the teachings of the Buddha is not about a decision tree that if this happens, do this. And if this happens, do that. That would be like a permanent answer for every single situation, where we understand that there isn't that permanence. So getting to this higher consciousness where the mind is enlightened, it is to take in information of the variables and things that are going on around you based on your wisdom and your reflections, then come to a conclusion about a wise decision that will work in that situation. But then don't cling to that decision thinking that that's permanent. And now every single time you encounter that same situation, you're going to do it exactly the same way, because that would be unwise. Because of the universal truth of impermanence, if you cling to a decision, then it's going to lead to some discontentedness or some unwholesome result. So as moving to this higher consciousness and gaining wisdom, you're always taking in information and what's going on in the situation, and then reflecting on that through the wisdom that you've cultivated on the path, sometimes reaching out to a teacher for help or guidance to be able to do that reflection, and then you come to a conclusion of what you are choosing to do in that situation. And then when you put that decision out, you read whatever's coming back to you to determine whether it was wise or unwise. The natural law of Gotama is like the most unbiased teacher you'll ever find, because whenever you make a decision, if you experience any unwholesome results, you know there was something unwise in there. And now you just need to uncover and figure out what that lack of wisdom was, so that now you can cultivate it. And then next time you can make a better decision, and you're increasing your wisdom. Eventually, by the time you get to enlightenment, every decision you make will be wise, and it will produce wholesome results for you every single time. You will have extinguished all your unwise decisions, and you will only be making wise decisions, and you experience nothing but wholesome results in your life because your mind's fully purified. You're no longer making decisions through craving, through anger, and through what we call ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. As long as you've got pollutions in your mind where you're trying to make decisions based on your own selfish desires, or based on your anger, or based on this lack of wisdom, you'll make unwise decisions just with a lack of wisdom and just unknowing. But when you purify your mind and you arise these wholesome qualities, you can fully make wise decisions in every situation. And this is what it means to awaken to enlightenment, that your mind's no longer polluted and you're making wise decisions that's only producing wholesome results. So then understanding the natural law of Gotama through the precepts, but also through other teachings, is what's going to help you to be able to come to that understanding of the natural law of Gotama and fully awaken to these natural laws. You just stretching, or you have another question? I saw your hand go up. Doing some dance over there. All right. Any other questions you guys have here? Any follow-ups? No? Okay, let me see what we've got online. Okay, I don't see any questions online either. So what I'll do then is thank all of you guys for joining and deciding that today is a day you'd like to learn the teachings of the Buddha. And at the same time, invite you to our future classes that are here on Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday. We have regular classes throughout the week. And then we also have various courses and retreats that happen throughout the month as well. Today, we're going to be starting a retreat at 3 p.m. I'm going to be teaching for about 2 hours this afternoon, and then we're going to go out and do an activity together if people would like to do an activity together. And then over the course of this week, I'm going to be having a retreat where at 9 a.m. we're going to get together each day, and I'm going to teach to 12:30, and I'm going to share various teachings that help you develop a foundation in the path to enlightenment. Then from 12:30 to 6:30 is free time, where you can go out and do anything that you like, or you can come to the scheduled activities that we have. And then at 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., I'm going to be teaching some more each day over the next 5 days. And this is a kind of all-encompassing retreat where you're going to be able to learn all the foundational teachings that you need, plus all the teachings you need to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. It's from today up until Friday, but you can come to any part of that you like. You can come to just today, or today and tomorrow, or 3 or 4 days. And it's going to also be live streamed and recorded as well. So those of you guys that are joining us online, you can attend this retreat through YouTube, Facebook, or on Zoom. And then if you can't attend any of the live classes, it's going to be recorded. So you'll see it in our YouTube channel, you'll see it in Facebook, and you'll see it on our podcast eventually as well. So this is a way that you can learn, is by learning through the retreats. So if you guys would like to attend, you're welcome to come to any of these classes, courses, and retreats. This group learning program that I'm sharing on Sundays, it's on Sunday and Wednesday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. I teach here at 9 a.m. and then I teach at home at 9 p.m. and I live stream it from home, and people can come in through Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, and it's also on our podcast as well. So if you're interested in getting rid of these anger and sadness and frustration and all these other discontent feelings, there's resources and guidance here to help you, and it's all available at no cost. You don't have to pay anything. I don't have any expectations of you whatsoever. So you can download these books, you can take them and go print them, you can come to the courses and retreats, you can get printed versions here on Amazon, you can even get personal guidance. If you would like to talk one-on-one, you're welcome to schedule time with me, or come to talk to me after classes and courses and retreats, and I'll help you on a one-on-one basis as well. So I'd like to just make sure you guys know of all these options, and you can get them all through our website. If you go to buddhadailywisdom.com, you'll see all the online resources, the classes, courses, and retreats. So thank you all for joining for today's class. Perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee krap. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.